Welcome to Atman Strikes Back Daily Boxing News. How we doing, people? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm here to talk boxing and some other stuff if you guys are on it. But before the main topics of boxing discussion, I want to rant a little bit on this Deontay Wilder situation, all right? So we all know about the now infamous, and shout out to everyone in the live chat. I will come on to you guys in just a second. I want to get this off my chest before I lose track of my thoughts, all right? So bear with me. So we all know about this Deontay Wilder studio rant at Simon Jordan, and a lot of it was actually cut because Wilder said way more than what was broadcast. But it led to, obviously, me doing a video, many people doing videos about it. And in the comment section of my video, there was an individual, and there was a few people, but there was one individual in particular, a young lady, who wrote a big paragraph about how I'm going to end up with egg on my face when the evidence about Luke Partridge, Tyson Fury cheating in the Wilder fights comes out. And Deontay Wilder has been alluding to this. But I tend to remember things that people say when they're particularly ridiculous, all right? And this same young lady, she knows who she is. She left a comment on my prediction video for Anthony Joshua versus Francis Ngannou. And she said something similar in that video, or in the comment section of that video. She said, you're going to end up with egg on your face when Francis Ngannou knocks Anthony Joshua out. I mean, you got to love casuals. Now, with regards to the Deontay Wilder situation, she said, you have to ask yourself, why hasn't Tyson Fury sued for defamation? And that is a reasonable question to ask, okay? It is kind of curious that Fury hasn't gone down the route of litigation. But what these people don't ask themselves is, if Deontay Wilder has all this evidence, why hasn't he released it? That's an even more important question than asking why Tyson Fury hasn't sued. Why hasn't Deontay Wilder released the information? Because obviously, the result of those Fury fights burns Wilder up inside. Folks, what is it, 4 or 5 years removed from the last fight between them? You've had 4 or 5 years to bring the evidence out, and never mind bringing it out in a documentary, because that's what Wilder's talking about. The documentary's going to come out. Never mind bringing it out in a documentary. Why is he not giving this evidence to the boxing authorities to get those results overturned? To get the losses on his record expunged? The losses to Partridge anyway. Why isn't he doing that? If he has this slam dunk, smoking gun evidence. And the answer is very simple, as far as I'm concerned. He doesn't have it. See, what this guy has, and I'm telling you, this is what you're going to see if this documentary ever comes out, is a bunch of people who have a gripe with Luke Partridge. And they'll be coming out telling these anecdotal stories about being in camp with him or something. And one of them already came out a few years ago. He was a guy that was in the gym with Luke Partridge. He was some fighter, and I'm going to call him a bum, right? Not because he's not a particularly good heavyweight, but because of the fact he pulled this move, right? He was in the gym. I'm going to say he's a bum. And he was showing these Everlast Powerlock sparring gloves that didn't have much padding in them. And he was saying, see, Fury's removed the padding from his gloves. No, he didn't remove the padding from those gloves. Those gloves are notorious for having, especially back then, I don't know if they've improved the quality control now, but back then, I know this for a fact, there are videos online, loads of videos from during that time period, of people who reviewed those gloves. There are people in the comment section on the video reviews about those gloves saying that the padding wears out extremely fast. Literally within a matter of months, the padding is all coming out, and yeah. So those gloves, the Everlast Powerlock sparring gloves, back then were notorious for very poor quality padding, which would deteriorate quickly. So all this stuff about, oh, Fury took the padding out of the... No, they were just rubbish gloves. And in a boxing gym, there's loads of different pairs of gloves. Fury, wore one pair of gloves, and off that one incident, he's been accused of... And think about it. That's the only sparring partner I've seen come out and say Fury takes the padding out of his gloves. So what do you think is more likely? Now, all these other guys that have spotted him, they never said that he took the padding out of his gloves. No, one guy, some bum, said, oh yeah, he took the padding out. Probably because he got embarrassed in sparring, right? The guy's a journeyman fighter. And then he's coming out talking about, oh yeah, he took the padding out of his gloves, and give it a rest. And look, I'm one of the biggest Luke Partridge critics on YouTube. So if Partridge had a history of doing dodgy stuff like that, taking padding out of gloves, I'd be calling him out on it. Everyone here knows that I call Partridge out on his BS all the time, to such a degree that among the Partridge, aka Fury fan base, I'm seen as public enemy number one. So I'm not here as some kind of Partridge fanboy, but my allegiance is to the truth. My allegiance is to reason, what's reasonable and rational. And I'm telling you, folks, Deontay Wilder is a delusional idiot, and he always has been. So all of this talk about, and think about the number of people he's accused. He accused the referee. Think about this. It's not just Partridge he's accusing. He accused the referee, who in that fight was it Kenny Bayless? Forget now. Well, in one of the fights anyway. I think it was Kenny Bayless in one of the fights. So he accused the referee. He accused Fury himself of taking padding out of his gloves and bizarrely putting egg weights in his gloves, which is just so ridiculously stupid a concept. I can't even begin to describe how ridiculous it is to you. He accused his own cornerman, Mark Breland, of spiking his water. The fact that there was even some idiot who turned up in a comment section of that video of mine and basically accused me of being a shill or some kind of compromised individual. I mean, when you're dealing with people who are intellectually challenged, who are just innately stupid, there's no reasoning with these kind of people. All right. And Deontay Wilder is an example of it. And birds of a feather flock together. Because Deontay Wilder is such an idiot, he's so stupid, people who are similarly stupid latch onto the things that he says and follow him. All right. The man's a flipping brain donor. Right. Now, that's not to say that Tyson Fury, Luke Partridge, isn't capable of cheating, because of course he failed a PED test in the past. And there was all sorts of very questionable, dodgy things surrounding the failed PED test and subsequent dealings with UCAD and what have you. So if Deontay Wilder was to come out and claim that Partridge was on PEDs in one of their fights, or maybe all of their fights, he'd still need to produce evidence to substantiate it, but it would be a more plausible claim, right? I'd be more willing to entertain that than this idea he had egg weights in his gloves, the referee was in on it and he spiked Wilder's drinking, or the referee was in on it somehow. Mark Breland spiked Wilder's drinking water, and Mark Breland stopped the fight. This is what Wilder was saying. Mark Breland stopped the fight because ultimately he wanted Wilder to lose. Not that he was actually protecting his fighter, because that's the way that most of us saw it. No. He wanted his fighter to lose. I mean, unbelievable. The only person in Deontay Wilder's team, and one of the only people that has remained throughout, is Shelly Finkel. Shelly Finkel is a very clever individual who knows how to pander to Deontay Wilder's ego. And because he's a money man, a businessman, he's not a trainer or anything like that, it's hard for Deontay to actually blame him for anything. With that being said, Deontay Wilder, and it's amazing to me, the fact that the Wilder fans still try to gloss over the fact that Deontay was offered the Anthony Joshua fight by DAZN themselves. They act as though that never happened. It's absolutely incredible. They constantly turn up in comment sections saying AJ ducked Wilder for years and AJ never wanted to fight. He went to his network. He agreed with his network that he would fight Deontay Wilder, for God's sake. His network sat Wilder down and offered him over $100 million. Reportedly, Wilder was happy in this meeting and was ready to sign a contract, but then, again, allegedly, Shelly Finkel leaned over and whispered in his ear, but we don't know what Anthony Joshua was getting. They're offering you a sum, but they're not telling you what AJ's getting. He was talked out of it. Okay, now, as an outsider looking in, what happened there was that, if that did indeed happen, it's all alleged. But if that did indeed happen, the people around Wilder were not acting in his best interests. They were actually acting in the best interests of the network that they were working with. Because remember, at the time, DAZN was a newcomer to the American broadcast market. So it was Showtime and Fox that Wilder was used to working with and his people. And that's where their allegiance was lying. Yeah, their allegiance was with Fox and Showtime. It weren't with this newcomer, a rival of Fox and Showtime, DAZN. So in my opinion, if it went down that way in that boardroom, and it was reported that Wilder was talked out of it. That was reported in the media all over the place. It's just who was the individual that whispered in his ear. Somebody in his team, and from what, as I understand it, it may have been Shelly Finkel, told him, no, we don't know what AJ. They found some reason, some way, some tactic to get in Wilder's head and stop him from signing the contract. See, a guy like Shelly Finkel knows how to manipulate Deontay Wilder. That's what I'm getting at here. That's why he's still there. He knows how to get what he wants out of that guy. He understands Wilder as a character. He understands what works with a guy like him. And you get an insight into the type of person Wilder is by the choices he makes. I don't want to get into his personal life, but let's just stick to his boxing choices. I mean, there's all sorts of weird stuff about his brother, his ex, missus. But if we just look at his boxing life. So here's a guy, right, who under Malik Scott was coming out and saying that Wilder is the most dynamic heavyweight of all time. Wilder has got better boxing skills than Muhammad Ali. When have you ever heard Malik Scott, who has trained some other fighters, he's involved in training Gilberto Ramirez. When have you ever heard Malik Scott come out and say such absurd things before? He never does. It's only when he was training Deontay Wilder that he was coming out and saying this totally ridiculous stuff. That gives you an insight into the type of character Wilder is behind the scenes. All right, this is a man with a colossal ego and an extremely low level of intelligence. And you combine those two things, it's going to get wacky real quick. Think about it. A guy with a colossal ego, but extremely low intelligence. Yeah. That is why you get all this bizarre behavior, not only from Wilder himself, but even team members. So, this idea is going to come out with a documentary. Let's talk about a documentary a second, right? When he was ranting at Simon Jordan, I'm not sure how many people picked up on this, but he said, I've got all the people lined up who are going to speak on this and that, and people from his team. And never mind people speaking from his team. a bunch of talking heads, a bunch of people yapping, giving us anecdotes. Give us evidence. Now, yeah, testimony can be evidence, but if it was real smoking gun evidence, they would have gone to the boxing authorities with it long ago. I don't think he accused Fury of cheating in the third fight. It's more so the first and second fights. Because again, in the third fight, and this is another thing that totally destroys the Fury cheated narrative, at least in the ways that Wilder is accusing him of cheating, is the fact that in the run-up to the third fight, Wilder assured everyone that he had provisions in place to prevent Fury cheating a third time. And in that third fight, Wilder got knocked out worse than he did in the second fight. So how do you reconcile that? Since Wilder had all the provisions in place and there was no cheating in that third fight, and he still got knocked out. The delusion is incredible. Obviously, there's all the talk. Oh, how do you explain the gloves? You know, there was another idiot in the comment section of that last video I did who said that in that first fight, why weren't Fury's gloves floppy and deformed in the Usyk fights when they were floppy and deformed in that first Wilder fight? Because he wore the same gloves. No, he didn't. In the first fight, Tyson Fury was wearing Everlast MX. In the two Usyk fights, he was wearing Paffin Sport gloves. Totally different brand. And if you say, well, they're both horsehair gloves, boxing glove manufacturers use different densities of foam. They use different glove compartments, different amounts of horsehair. The horsehair distribution can be in different parts of the glove. Many gloves have a blend of horsehair and foam. In fact, most horsehair gloves contain foam as well. They basically have, well, there's two ways they do it. In fact, three ways. One way they do it is to have an outer layer of foam, right? Which is basically laminated to the exterior leather on the glove. Or laminated within the interior, but it's like the exterior leather, if you understand. So they've got an outer layer of foam, then they've got a layer of horsehair, then they've got an inner layer of foam, which goes up against your knuckles. So some fight gloves are manufactured that way. Other fight gloves are manufactured where there's just an outer layer of foam, thin outer layer of foam, then horsehair, then your knuckle. And then another way is an inner layer of foam against your knuckle, and then horsehair, and that's it. So different manufacturers construct their horsehair gloves differently. Hence, they don't all look the same. But one pair of gloves, which always looks, at least back then, I don't know if they've changed the manufacturing techniques or whatever now, but one pair of gloves which has always looked used and deformed were Everlast MX. And that is the reason that Floyd Mayweather, for example, refused to fight Marcos Maidana wearing Everlast MX. He said the fight's not going to go ahead unless you change your gloves. So this idea that, oh no, those gloves, they look unusual. No, they didn't look unusually deformed. They've always looked like that, at least back then. They would post on Instagram pictures of the gloves, particularly for Mayweather fights before the fight would happen, and you know, many other fights. And you would often see these Everlast MX looking all creased up and looking like there was no foam in it, because horsehair is very low density padding. So it doesn't hold the structure of the glove together very well. And as I've already explained, after a couple rounds of heavyweights punching each other with horsehair gloves like Everlast MX, the horsehair is going to clump up inside because of the sweat, and the glove is going to start looking weird. Yeah? That is not unique to Tyson Fury, folks. And also the way Tyson Fury would flick his wrist when he was throwing his jab, right? If you know anything about physics, that flicking motion is going to cause the horsehair to move around weirdly in the glove. So anyway, you know, this is not a Tyson Fury protection ring here. As I've already said so many times, and as so many of you guys know, I'm one of the biggest critics of Tyson Fury, Luke Partridge. But my allegiance is not to, I'm not here just to bash Luke Partridge for the sake of bashing him because I don't like him. No. The reason I criticize him so much is because he brings it on himself. All right. But when I think he's being unfairly criticized, or an opponent or rival of his, even fans of his, are being unfair, I'm going to say that as well. I'm going to speak up. I'm going to speak out about that too. So, and in this case, Deontay Wilder is just chatting absolute rubbish. If he had evidence of all that, see, it's not just that he's claiming Fury cheated in one way. He's claiming he cheated in a host of different ways. The ref was in on it. Mark Breland spiked his water. Partridge took padding out of his gloves, and as well as padding out of his gloves, put egg weights in his gloves. I mean, good God, man. It's unbelievable. The only thing that is plausible, as far as I'm concerned, would be PEDs, but there's no evidence for that as far as I'm aware. But that's plausible. That's something that I would be willing to entertain. All this other stuff, look, have fighters taken padding out of their gloves in the past? Yes, we know there's been, loaded hand wraps and all sorts of glove tampering in boxing history. But with those particular gloves, it's common practice. I'm just speaking to the casuals out there who don't know anything about boxing, all right? They don't know what goes on behind the scenes in the locker room, on the way to the ring. It's common practice, and they've certainly never laced up a pair of gloves in their lives, right? But it's common practice in boxing. There's something a lot of fighters do, is when they get gloved up, they start trying to manipulate the foam in the glove, okay? And it's not illegal. Once you're gloved up, at least not in most jurisdictions as far as I'm aware, it's not illegal, because loads of fighters do it, and loads of fighters have spoken openly about it. Once you get gloved up and you've been wrapped, gloves are on, the commissioner signed the gloves, to say that they've witnessed the gloves, your hands being wrapped and the gloves being put on, and they've inspected the gloves, everything's above board. From that moment on, fighters are often free to do whatever they want with the gloves, okay? And some of them will constantly push the knuckle of their glove into their palm to try and break the padding down. Because even with fight gloves, when they're brand new, they can be a little stiff, okay? So some fighters want to build the flexibility in the glove before the opening bell. So they'll start pushing the knuckle of the glove into the palm to kind of break the padding down a little bit. Yeah, to get the glove a bit softer and a bit more comfortable. And also to try and move the padding away from the knuckles a bit to do a bit more damage. Mike Tyson has spoke openly about doing that. If you look at Mike Tyson fights from back in the days, watch him before the opening bell, and you'll constantly see him punching the inside of his hand. Some fighters, and Mike Tyson also used to do this, when they're still in the dressing room, they start hitting the wall. Hitting the pads is a common thing, but Mike Tyson he even used to hit the walls, okay? Not because he wanted to be some tough guy, but because he wanted to break down the padding in the gloves more quickly. Now, is it possible that Partridge did that in the first Wilder fight? Maybe, but that's not really anything, that isn't quite common in boxing. Could you class it as cheating? Well, the padding in the gloves is going to break down during the fight anyway. Yeah? In a long fight, the padding in the gloves is going to break down. This is why fight gloves generally are only used for one fight. Now they do, if you ever look at a pair of fight gloves with a lot of manufacturers, they've got, on the wrist, there's a part where they've got this little grid, and you're supposed to tick off the number of rounds that the gloves have been used for. And some gloves, some fight gloves, I guess they say they can be used for 24 rounds, and after that they can no longer be used. But in most cases they don't. I mean, maybe small hall shows with small fighters, they might allow them to reuse gloves if they haven't been used that long. And they're still going to inspect them anyway. So it's just an advisory guide, right? But in most cases, fight gloves are only used for one fight. Why? Because they break down, the padding breaks down over the course of a fight. so, so what many fighters do is try to accelerate that process. And I've never heard of a fighter being uh, penalized for doing that. I've never heard of a commission saying it's illegal. I can't tell you that there's no commission in the world that doesn't deem it illegal. But again, fighters have spoken about this openly. So if Partridge did something like that, in the locker room, maybe hitting the walls to break down the padding of the gloves a little bit, and it's only horsehair and foam, so you wouldn't need to really hit much to get the padding very soft. I mean, those Everlast MX gloves are soft and broken in as soon as you put them on. That's probably a better way to describe them. They're trying to break the gloves in. Yeah, when fighters put a new pair of fight gloves on, oftentimes you'll see them try and break the gloves in. So if that's part of the evidence that Deontay Wilder has, there was people on the inside and they were showing that Fury was, after having his gloves signed off by the commission, pushing the padding on the gloves down and manipulating the padding before he went in the ring with me. Well, loads of fighters do that. Fighters do that when they're in the ring before the opening bell. Now, should they be allowed to do it? Well, that's a discussion. But it's not some like clandestine thing, that is unprecedented in boxing. It's a common thing in boxing. So anyway, I'm gonna get to your guys' questions and comments. You guys' questions and comments. Big up everyone in the live chat. Hopefully you can hear me loud and clear and haven't been ranting, screaming in the dark. All right, shout out to everyone. We will get onto the other boxing topics. Just shout everybody out. We got Jez in the place. We got Truth Channel. We got KD versus the World. We got Galaxy Edits. We got Omar. We got Sean. Where's Carlos? Hands of Steel. BG. Cash Machine. Truth Channel. We got Ad. What else we got here? BH. Home of the Elucidator. Okay. Already bigged up Cash Machine, BG London, Tony, Fight Sport Talk, Ocean Blue. What else we got in here? WPW. We got, is it Staraptor Flock? Complicated name. Big up Striker. He says Wilder said he invites Partridge to sue him, so why, I guess you meant to say, can't he produce evidence? Wilder should implicate Warren in cheating. He'd get his wish. Indeed. And it's a legitimate question to ask when someone is being apparently defamed. Why wouldn't they sue? And sometimes it is an indication that there is some legitimacy to the accusations when someone won't sue if they're being defamed. But I don't know how it works in other countries, but certainly in the United States, there is a process called discovery. When litigation ensues, there's a process called discovery where you can be, sat down and you're going to have to produce evidence. And in that process of discovery, whatever you have is going to come out. And not only whatever you have, but you might find that there are other things that come out about the person who's being accused. Yeah, things which he's not even being sued for, but other things will come out, and that opens up a whole new rabbit hole. And so some people, even if they are being defamed, because they want to hide other things, they don't sue for that reason. It's a bit convoluted the way I explained it, but hopefully it makes sense. So, yeah, it is interesting that Fury won't sue for defamation, but who's Fury ever sued? Some people are not really about that life of, going around suing people and all that. I'm not aware of Fury ever suing anyone. But as interesting as it is that Fury's never sued, Wilder has never produced the evidence. And here we are 4 or 5 years after their last fight. Their second fight was when? 2020? Was their second fight in 2020 or 2021? And that was the one where Wilder said the most cheating was going on. So how long ago was that? 6 years? Folks, 6 years. And he says he's been sitting on all this evidence. Why would he do that? Why not get the results overturned by producing this smoking gun evidence after all that time? How does that make sense, Wilder fans? How does that make sense that the guy sat on this evidence for 6 years? Why on earth would he do that? I'm telling you, because this guy doesn't know what proof actually is. There is a difference between evidence and proof. So, yeah, there you go. Railway Unboxing fan, big up. Cash Machine, Matt Jukes. Anyway, there's me ranting about Deontay Wilder and his fans who just talked the most incredible amount of nonsense. Let's move on to the main topic of discussion for this stream, which is Daniel Dubois calling out Fabio Wardley. This was a post that Dubois put up on his Instagram page, and as you can see below, he says, "Let's go Fabio Wardley, sign the contract, let's get it on." Now, what did he mean by sign a contract? Is he inferring and letting us know that negotiations have actually begun? Or is he just being hyperbolic? You know, is he hoping that somehow real negotiations will begin? Is it just a figure of speech rather than him being literal? That's what I mean to say. When he said sign a contract, is that just a figure of speech? Or is he being literal? Does Fabio Wardley have a contract in front of him for a Daniel Dubois fight? Now, as Cash Machine has just pointed out, Daniel Dubois is coming off a loss. I don't like the concept, and never have. But fighters coming off losses, and it's not like it was a controversial loss, because if it was a controversial loss, you could make an exception. For example, when Derek Chisora, quote unquote, lost to Robert Helenius, he got a shot against Vitaly Klitschko off the back of that. But anyone who saw that fight will know that Derek Chisora got jobbed big time on the cards. So I wouldn't necessarily have an issue with a fighter who put in a good performance but got jobbed on the cards, getting a world title shot off the back of it. But that's not the case with Daniel Dubois. He got absolutely annihilated by Alexander Usyk. Why should he be getting a world title shot off the back of that? You know? And again, it's what we call, or what I have coined, it's a term I've come up with, legacy privilege. Because Daniel Dubois was a world champion for 5 minutes in the past, because he does have some good wins on his resume, and he's been one of the major players in the heavyweight division for some time, he is now allowed to jump the queue, despite the fact he's coming off a loss, a conclusive, devastating loss. He's allowed to jump the queue because of the stuff he's done in the past. I don't agree with it. I don't agree with that at all. Because ultimately, in boxing, we want to know who the best is, right? If you keep giving opportunities to former champions who are coming off losses, and I'm not saying Dubois is washed up at this point, but certainly some other fighters in the past who have been washed up have got opportunities to fight for world titles because they used to be champions long ago. If you keep doing that, if you keep recycling former champions because of legacy privilege, then you're not really going to get to know who the actual best is. Not until you start putting these undefeated fighters, or at least fighters who are coming off a string of wins, start giving them the opportunities to fight for the world title, to, you know, pit themselves against the champions. Then the champions will have, I'm going to say, more of a test, at least in some cases, because they're going up against fresh fighters, fighters in many cases who haven't lost, who are full of confidence, who aren't shop worn. So, yeah, this legacy privilege is not good for boxing. It's nothing new. It's been going on forever. I mean, you can go back to the Mayweather era, and they kept recycling Zab Judah. You guys remember that? They also kept recycling Paulie Malignaggi. He kept getting opportunities which he really didn't deserve because he was a champion previously. And also with Malignaggi, he was seen as like a safe first defense for a lot of champions because he couldn't punch. So he was a name, a former champion, but there was no power there. So they always felt it was kind of safe to put their guy in against Melanagi. That's a great first defense to have, that kind of thing. Zab Judah, okay, he could punch a bit, but he was vulnerable and he was a front runner. He was a guy that would start brightly in fights, but fade very quickly. So, yeah, it's always been the case in boxing. They dig up these old champions, literally drag them out of the grave and recycle them as opponents for new champions over and over again. But Daniel Dubois is not in that position. He's in his late 20s. He doesn't appear to be washed up yet. Be that as it may, I still don't think he should be getting a title shot off the back of a loss. However, if we just look at Wardley and Dubois as a stylistic matchup from an entertainment perspective, do I want to see it? Hell yeah. I'm not going to condone, again, Dubois getting a title shot off the back of a loss, but it is a fascinating stylistic matchup. And on paper, it appears to have fireworks written all over it. Because you've got Fabio Wardley, who is unrefined because of his lack of amateur background, but he has a massive heart. He's extremely physically fit. He's tough. And he has this tremendous natural fighting instinct. We've seen it so many times now with Fabio Wardley. He's gone up against the guy, if the fight were to take place, in Daniel Dubois, who is a lot more refined from a technical perspective. He's no technical whiz or anything, but, you know, Dubois' technique is a bit more refined. He's not as fluid as Wardley, but he's a bit more structured, right? A bit more together, a bit more refined in what he does. Dubois is also tremendously strong physically. He's a great puncher with both hands. He's very aggressive. He's got a great jab. His footwork is relatively good. You know, the way he springs in and out of range, using his jab usually, but then following up with the hooks. I mean, both guys are formidable offensively. I'm going to say that Dubois is even more formidable offensively. And as I say, I think a bit more structured, better jab. But Dubois always had this question hanging over his head regarding his resolve. You know, whenever he's in a fight where he can't land his shots and he's getting pinged a lot, he takes the knee. You know, it's as if he's proposing to his opponent. Whereas Wardley's the opposite to that, isn't he? He's a guy who has a balls to the wall, never say die mentality. He's all or nothing. You literally got to knock him out, nail him to the canvas to stop him. And incredibly, despite the fact that Wardley's been hit a lot in his fights, he's never been down. Does he have an iron jaw? Well, he's got a pretty good chin. We've seen him rocked a few times, but he's never been down. What I'll say is that Wardley's never been in there, as far as I'm concerned, with a puncher like Daniel Dubois before. Dubois has been in there with punchers like Wardley, maybe bigger than Wardley. But Wardley hasn't been in there with a puncher like Dubois. So as often as Fabio Wardley gets hit, would he be able to, would his chin hold up against Dubois' power? That's one of the fascinating questions about this matchup if it happens. How will Wardley's chin fare against Dubois' power? Will Wardley be able to weather the storm that like he has done in so many fights when Dubois starts fast? See, again, Dubois tends to be good in fights, and he tends to show toughness in fights where he's able to hit his opponent consistently, even if he's getting hit back a lot. We saw that against Hrgovic. We saw that against Jarrell Miller. Yeah, he got hit a lot in both those fights, particularly the Hrgovic fight, but he didn't lose heart because he was constantly landing his own shots. Well, I have to imagine he's going to be constantly landing his own shots against Wardley too. Is Wardley going to be able to take away Dubois' jab? Is Wardley going to be able to be elusive enough? You know, Brill Cream Ben, Vidal Sassoon. head and shoulders. Ben Davison. He's a smart guy. He and Lee Wiley analyze fighters technically and to some extent mentally as well. And I'm sure he'll know all the things that I've just spoken about here. That in order to get Daniel Dubois into that state where he wants to quit, you have to take his offense away from him. It's not enough to just be hitting him with shots. You have to make sure that he can't hit you. That's when he gets frustrated and goes into a mental meltdown. We've seen it 3 times now. Can Fabio Wardley do that? Can he actually avoid enough Dubois punches to make Dubois frustrated to the point where he wants to quit? You guys let me know what you think in the comments. In the live chat, should I say. Staraptor Flock says, to be fair, George Foreman got to fight Michael Moorer off a loss and he won. Yeah, he did. But that's not really the point. The point is, if you're coming off a loss, you don't deserve the shot because there are other fighters who are not coming off losses. Yeah? There are other fighters who are in better form than you recently. So why should you get to jump the queue ahead of people who have done more than you've done recently? And George Foreman's a good example, actually, of a fighter who didn't deserve the opportunity that he got. George Foreman was drafted in as a supposed soft touch for Michael Moorer, and for 9.5 rounds, it was a soft touch. He beat the living daylights out of George Foreman in that fight. But Michael Moorer was always very chinny, and George Foreman, even at the age of 45, could still crack. It was what it was. But yeah, it should be a meritocracy, boxing. It shouldn't be a thing where these washed up old champions, again, not that Dubois was washed up, but in general, should just be able to stroll in off a loss and get another title shot ahead of people that are younger, fresher, in some cases undefeated or at least coming off wins. BG London says Wardley's nose is going to fall off soon, forever bleeding. Ocean Blue says, I'll be picking Dubois for those reasons, but maybe I'll be wrong yet again. Little Jacob says, yeah, I agree, Dubois is more fundamentally sound. Yes, big up Striker, he says, anyone remember Axel Schultz getting 3 title fights in a row despite losing them all? Yeah, Axel Schultz fought George Foreman, of course, and a lot of people thought he was jobbed in the Foreman fight. I think it was close, but whatever. Schultz was a tough guy. You know, we often speak about how Chris Billum Smith looks like a World War II or even World War I soldier. He just got that look about his face. Axel Schultz looked like a World War I or World War II German soldier. Anyone ever looked at Axel Schultz's face? He literally looked like a German soldier in the face. Evil Uncle Phil says Dubois getting stopped. Indeed, guaranteed barn burner, says Omar. I agree. Tony S says, I wouldn't mind seeing Adelaide versus Hooney on the undercard. I mean, that's an interesting fight because Hooney would absolutely box the ears off Adelaide. Maybe not to the extent that he boxed the ears off Wardley, because some people won't want to admit this, but Adelaide is actually a better boxer than Wardley. And when I say he's a better boxer than Wardley, we literally saw it for the first few rounds of their fight. That wasn't as one-sided a fight as people are making it out to be. If you go back and watch that Adelaide-Wardley fight, Adelaide was actually outboxing Wardley for several rounds in there. But Wardley, of course, has this way of imposing his will on you and getting the job done in the end. So, yeah, I'm going to stick to that statement. I'm saying Adelaide is actually a bit of a better boxer than Wardley. Not as strong, not as resilient. As far as the power, I don't know. Does he hit as hard as Wardley? Possibly, possibly not. That's up for debate. But either way, I think he would get soundly outboxed by Hooney. But because Adelaide can punch and Hooney doesn't have the best chin, it could be another Hooney Wardley scenario. Matt Duke says a heavyweight card would be good. Adelaide versus Bacoli would be interesting. Yeah, it's kind of baffling why promoters don't do more heavyweight. Actually, I'm just going to have to scrap what I was about to say. I actually do understand why promoters don't do more heavyweight cards where it's heavyweight fights from top to bottom, because heavyweights tend to generate more interest, especially with everyone, but even more so with casual boxing fans. And I say that as somebody who is a hardcore boxing fan that loves heavyweight boxing. But I'm just speaking objectively, casuals are more likely to be interested when it's heavyweights, right? And therefore, if you're stacking a card with heavyweight fights from top to bottom, you're potentially missing out on an opportunity to have those heavyweight fights headline their own shows and make more money over the long run. So that's probably why we don't see more heavyweight cards from top to bottom. Maybe under Turkey Al Sheikh, you can get more of them, but under normal boxing promotional business without Saudi involvement, these days they seem reluctant to do that because, again, I think they want to make their money stretch a bit further or get more money in, milk those heavyweight fighters for money by headlining their own shows rather than having heavyweight fights maybe hidden on undercards. So I reckon that's why they don't do it as much as we would like them to do it. But you could still stack a show with heavyweight fights, with heavyweights who aren't really headliners on the undercard. Do you know what I mean? Heavyweights who aren't that well known. Even Uncle Phil says Warren having all those heavyweights with so many inactive is annoying. Yeah, it is annoying. And it's getting a little bit PBC Al Haymanish, isn't it? Because this is what we saw with PBC when they had so many fighters in particular, is a tremendous amount of inactivity. There's this reluctance to match the fighters against each other. And with Frank Warren at the moment, it's looking that way. But here we are talking about a potential fight between two Frank Warren heavyweights, right? Daniel Dubois, Fabio Wardley. And of course, we have seen Frank Warren heavyweights fight each other in the not too distant past. Joseph Parker against Wardley was two Frank Warren heavyweights. I mean, Ajit Caballero versus Zhang was two Frank Warren heavyweights, although that was quite a long time ago now. Yems Talk Boxing says, Hatman, where do you think Fury versus Makhmudov will be? Probably in Manchester. Probably in Manchester. I don't know if it'll be at Old Trafford or one of the big arenas in Manchester. But yeah, I suspect it'll be in Manchester. Tony S says, I don't understand the reasoning in signing up Nelson Heiser. I guess he's just there as cannon fodder. Mark says, Tom Little versus Alan Babbage was still one of my favorite fun low-level fights. Peak Eddie backyard brawl. I'm not sure I ever saw that fight. Tom Little versus Babbage? Did I see that fight? I don't remember seeing it. The Babbage fights that I remember were when he fought that cruiserweight guy who took Joseph Parker several rounds. I think that was during lockdown. So I remember that fight. I remember Babbage versus all sorts of obscure opponents. People you've never heard of before or since. I remember when he fought that Ivan Drago cosplay guy. Is he called Steve Robinson? That was after he got knocked out by Rosansky. That was before the Johnny Fisher fight. So I remember a lot of Babic fights. I don't necessarily remember the opponents' names though, because they were so obscure, most of them. Tony S says, I think Babic could go into Misfits. I think that'd be the best thing for him. Matt Duke says Disney Drago. Yeah, something like that. You know, Babic, in my opinion, was ruined in sparring before he got ruined in the professional boxing ring. He got ruined in sparring because he had no defense at all. He didn't care about defense. He was in there sparring enormous heavyweights all the time, having absolute slugfests in the gym. And I think it destroyed his punch resistance. I think initially Babic's punch resistance was pretty decent, but it deteriorated quite rapidly because of all the stuff that was going on in the gym. Because the first time that we saw Babic hurt was against, I think, a Frenchman, and the shots looked pretty innocuous. So I don't think it was a case of he hadn't been hit properly up until that Frenchman hit him. I think, like I say, his punch resistance was being worn down in the gym. So Yem says, thoughts on Ajagba versus Martin. That's a fight that Ajagba, big up Sonya Blade, that's a fight that Ajagba should win pretty easily. You know, Martin is a veteran now and he can be awkward. He can punch a little bit. He gave Jared Anderson some problems a couple years ago. But I feel like Ajagba's in his prime now. He's showing new wrinkles to his game. I thought it was a pretty good performance against Bukoli, although his stamina was a little questionable in that fight, I think, Ajagba. But he did show a back foot game. He showed improved fluidity. He's still got the punching power. So, yeah, he should be able to beat Charles Martin without too much trouble. We've got Sonya Blade crushing on crushing on Daniel Dubois. All right. Super Dan. Evil Uncle Phil says Zuffa Boxing has Solomon crashing out. WBC is soon to be done out here. I mean, Solomon's putting on a brave face though, isn't he? He's saying, oh no, I don't see any threat from Zuffa. Boxing is for the boxers. And yeah, I saw Solomon on several channels being interviewed, including Ariel Helwani. Yem says, Vidal's opponent to be announced this week, could it be Masternak? We'll see. In the UK, most people would prefer it to be Alois Jr. because there's a bit of a rivalry there. Alois Jr. obviously nowhere near as accomplished as Masternak, but younger, fresher. Even Uncle Phil says Solomon deserves it. He's the dodgy guy that cleared Ben. Well, he also cleared Canelo, didn't he? He also cleared that guy that recently popped after the Yafai fight. But he's cleared so many people. When we say cleared, he only clears them as far as he allows them to fight for the WBC belts again. You can't ban anyone other than banning them from fighting for WBC belts. You can't ban them from boxing altogether. So we have to put an asterisk next to cleared. Cleared them for PR purposes, we can say about that. Indeed, Matthias too. Tony says Aloy's arguably lost against Zorro. Yeah, I saw that fight. Wait, has Aloy's fought since the Zorro fight? Let me look it up. Has Aloy's fought since that Zorro fight? Let me check the box rec page here. No, he hasn't. That Zorro fight was in July of last year, so that's a big layoff for Aloy's Jr. Has he been injured, or has he been doing some soul searching because of that very contentious win in the eyes of some people? And the reason I say, you know, most fighters wouldn't really need to do soul searching of a fight like that. They need to do some improvement, but it wouldn't be like a big emotional, traumatic situation for them. But Aloy's Jr. is a very, very overly emotional guy. He's a very dramatic guy, melodramatic, maybe even neurotic. And because of that, this might be a big deal for him. The fact he had a difficult fight against a guy like Ellis Zorro, who's been stopped by other people like Chev Clark, obviously knocked out in a round by Opataya. So maybe Aloy's in his head thinking that he's the most destructive puncher in boxing. He thought he was going to go in there and wipe the guy out in 30 seconds. But he got taken a distance and it was tough. So maybe that has traumatized Aloy's. Again, he's a very dramatic personality. Maybe it's sickened him to his stomach. I don't know. I'm just speculating here. It could be nothing to do with any of that. It could just be maybe managerial, promotional issues, injury. I don't know. But I'm putting it out there as a possibility because of the kind of character Aloy's is. Yem says, I saw last week that Miller was offered to fight Joyce in Nigeria in April. Wouldn't happen, but if it did, surely Miller would edge that. Based on their last performances, I would actually favor Joyce. I think Joyce looked a lot better against... Was Joyce's last fight against Hrgović? Let me double check. Yeah, his last fight was against Hrgović, so that's a long time out of the ring. That was in April last year, so nearly a year out for Joyce. But Joyce's performance against Hrgović, in my opinion, was much better than Miller's performance against Ibe. Like, Miller looked terrible against Ibe, but as other people have said, that hairpiece malfunction is actually a bit of a blessing in disguise for Miller, because now people are focusing on the hairpiece and not focusing on the performance, and the performance was shocking, right? It was a terrible performance. And so if he performed like that against the Joe Joyce who fought Hrgović, I think Joyce would win the fight. But at this stage, you know, Joyce is up there in age. We don't know whether he's significantly deteriorated since that Hrgović fight. So that's the thing. Even Uncle Phil says Joyce versus Miller is a good fight, but he's become a superstar now. Yeah, the blessing in disguise. Every cloud has a silver lining. Evil Uncle Phil says Miller owned that L and turned it into a W. He did, but I feel like he did it with gritted teeth. There are some people who think that it was a publicity stunt from the start, and Miller always intended to go in there and have his hairpiece knocked off, and that's possible. You know, fighters do publicity stunt things, and that's very possible. But based on Miller's reaction, I don't think it was a publicity stunt. I think that he looked genuinely embarrassed. You know, he looked genuinely embarrassed to me. And when he threw the hairpiece out of the ring, I've never seen Miller's face look like that before. I've never seen him act like that before. And I think he was acting like that out of being uncomfortable in the moment, but trying his best, like grinning. And, you know, there's a saying, grin and bear it. Yeah. Miller was putting on these fake smiles and grinning and pretending to laugh it off, but I think he was massively embarrassed by that. But once it's happened, and you either try and shy away from it or you lean into it. And Miller decided to lean into it. And that was the best thing to do from a PR perspective, is to lean into it. Exactly as Matt Juke says, I've seen a solar panel appearing on Miller's head for a while, so the wig piece hurt him bad. Yeah, Miller's had, if you watch a lot of his recent fights, you can see that he's got a bald patch developing on the top of his head. That bald patch has been coming on nicely for a good couple years now. Rivaled by Eddie Hearn's bald patch. Can you imagine Eddie Hearn with a bald head? I actually did a thumbnail a couple years back of Eddie Hearn as Dr. Evil with a bald head. In fact, let me see if I can find that thumbnail. You guys might appreciate it. No, I haven't tagged it very well because... And at this point, when I'm going through my thumbnail folder, there are literally thousands of Eddie Hearn thumbnails. So the chance of me scrolling through and finding it that way is pretty minimal. Oh, here we go. Spoke too soon. I found it. A lot of people said that this is my best ever thumbnail. There you go. Will we ever see Eddie Hearn do this for real? Shave his head? Or is he going to cling on to that barnet for his whole life? You're going to get a hair transplant like Wayne Rooney? Well, some people never go bald, right? Male pattern baldness is hereditary. Some guys never go bald. It's not always hereditary, but you know, it's often hereditary. My dad, for example, is in his 70s. He's still got a full head of hair. But yeah, Frank Warren bald would look weird as hell. That would look more weird than Eddie Hearn bald. Frank Warren bald, he'd look like a cancer patient or something. Yeah, he'd look so strange. Matthew says Triple D gets beat. Fact. Well, it's not a fact. It's your opinion. It's a perfectly reasonable opinion, but it's just an opinion. Let's not get carried away. Strangeness says the picture looks uncomfortably natural. Although, you know, I'm not an expert on Photoshop, so I didn't do a very good job of blending the top of Dr. Evil's head with Eddie Hearn's face. So it's a slightly different color. Matthew says he, as in Dubois, will get stopped. Okay, it's very possible. It's very possible. You know, I'm going to say something which some people might find strange. Alexander Usyk has had great longevity in his career. Not just from the viewpoint of success, but the actual performances, right? And one thing you'll notice about Alexander Usyk is that he's constantly switching up his hairstyle. Now, the hairstyle that somebody has is often, not always, but often a reflection of their character, of their personality, or where they are psychologically. If somebody has the same hairstyle their whole life, it tells you something about them, doesn't it? Right? Not necessarily something bad, depends on what kind of person they are. But in the case of Alexander Usyk, he's constantly switching up his hairstyle. And to me, the way I interpret that is he is someone who is constantly trying to learn. He is someone who is constantly trying to challenge himself, who's constantly trying to reinvent, not necessarily reinvent himself, but he's somebody who doesn't want to get stuck in a rut. Do you know what I mean? He doesn't want to get stuck in the same thought patterns. He wants to constantly evolve and try to improve. And that's my interpretation of Usyk constantly switching up his hairstyle. It's like an expression of the fact that even in the gym, he's, you know, trying to be innovative. He's a perfectionist. He's always looking to find ways to improve on what he does. And switching up the hairstyle, I think from a psychological perspective, he doesn't want to feel stale. He doesn't want to feel like everything is the same all the time. He wants to change his image, change his hair, and therefore keep energy about him, you know, because the way that energy works is that in order for it to produce movement, you know, in order for things to move, you have to keep the energy flowing, right? If you know anything about circuitry, the current has to flow. If the current is stopped from flowing, well, the device is going to stop. So the current has to flow. And if you think about it in that way, Usyk is trying to keep his energy flowing, switching up the looks, switching up the energy. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense to you guys or not? He always wants to keep like a fresh mindset and not get trapped like a hamster in a wheel, looking the same, feeling the same over and over again. That's a great point by Strangingness. He says, identity is something that can trap you. Wilder identifies as a victim and he'll never come out of that. Yeah, it's kind of like John Fury, isn't it? John Fury also identifies, he's got this victim complex where you know, the siege mentality has always been hard done by his whole life and his sons are done by, and that's a great point by Evil Uncle Phil. He says, I think there's that element, but he also throws off his opponents. That's a great point, actually. Yeah, maybe an aspect of it is Usyk switching up the hairstyle to throw the opponent off, because you know, sometimes opponents all through training camp, they envision winning a fight, right? They envision how their opponent is going to look in the ring, all this kind of stuff. If Usyk then turns up looking different to how you envisioned him, it might throw you off. So yeah, that's a good point. Interesting point. Omar says, didn't Vidal beat Dubois in the amateurs? Vidal beat quite a few well-known fighters in the amateurs. That's right, Tony. David Haye went back to his original Union Jack shorts and hair in the Bellew rematch. That's right, because in the first fight, he had a haircut like Sideshow Bob with black shorts, orange trim. That didn't work out for him, so he wanted to switch up the energy and reconnect with the haymaker, the David Haye of old. But I think that's why he switched up his look in the first place and had the Sideshow Bob haircut with the different color shorts, because he felt like the haymaker was no more. Do you know what I mean? He felt like with all the injuries and layoffs and all that kind of stuff, the Union Jack, cane roll, David Haye just wasn't cutting it anymore in the gym. So by switching up the hair and switching up the look, maybe he felt like he would unlock some new emotional energy. It didn't work, so then he went back to the haymaker stuff. Tony says, hey, Ed came rolls in the first fight as well. Oh, did he? Yeah, you might be right about that, to be fair. I guess it was in the run-up to the fight where he didn't have cane rolls, but maybe in the ring he did. All right, I do want to plug my latest Patreon content. This is my latest boxing video on the boxing tier on Patreon. I'm analyzing Anthony Joshua. Yep, Anthony Joshua, the most overanalyzed boxer in the world. I give my 2 pence worth in this video regarding AJ breaking his silence, and I also speak about many of the theories that people have come up with. Some of them would be described as controversial or distasteful. So I address some of the theories people have come up with about AJ and this terrible crash that he was involved in, and give my take on it as well. All right. I speak for over 45 minutes. I analyze AJ's body language and facial expressions, and like I say, give you my take on it and what I think will happen in his career moving forward, whether he's going to come back, etc. So check that out. That's on the boxing tier, the Boxing Brotherhood on my Patreon page. Again, you sign up, you download the app, you sign up, you can cancel at any time. Works the same way as Netflix. It's very cheap. It's like £3 a month or whatever. Again, cancel at any time. And obviously you have access to all my previous exclusive boxing content as well. So it's not like you just get access to this video. There are loads and loads and loads and loads of other videos and podcasts that I've done on there, stretching back many years now. All right. So that's my latest boxing upload on Patreon. And then as far as the topical content, this was my latest upload. I spoke for about an hour on the Steen. I'm just going to call it that for the sake of the algorithm. The Steen situation. All right. So if you guys are interested in hearing me give my views on this, then it's right there on Patreon. Sign up for the Brotherhood of Reason tier. Or you could also sign up for the whole shebang where you get all the content from the boxing tier and all the content from the topical tier combined at a discounted rate, obviously. So yeah, there's that. So yeah, let's move on from boxing talk then. We don't have to move on completely from boxing talk. We can still talk about it. What I should say is, let's open the parameters up to non-boxing talk as well. One topic which a lot of guys and girls like to discuss is movies. And I was saying in the last live stream I did, I probably watched more movies at the cinema last year than I have done possibly all my life. I was like damn near a film critic last year in terms of the amount of times I visited the cinema to watch movies. Evil Uncle Phil says that Talma didn't even post a video apologizing to fans. Does he need to post a video apologizing to fans? I don't think Atama's particularly concerned with listening to fans or worrying about fans' feelings and all that kind of thing. I think he's just focused on what's best for him as far as rest, recuperation, staying focused, etc. And if it is a genuine injury, and it could be, then what's there to apologize for? If you get injured, you get injured. You know what I mean? It's not like you wanted to get injured. Obviously, I'm open to the possibility that it wasn't really an injury. Who knows? Okay, so my opinion on pro wrestling, WWE, WCW, AEW. I was a massive fan of WWF growing up in the 1980s and 1990s, particularly the 90s and the Attitude Era. I was a massive fan. Loved it. Didn't think it was real. I mean, I must have been about 7 or 8 years old when I was told that wrestling wasn't real. And it seemed obvious to me, you know, once I was told, I looked at it, I was like, okay, well, yeah, it doesn't seem real. Now that it's been pointed out to me and explained, I get it. So I wasn't somebody that went into denial or anything like that when it's like when I was told that Santa Claus weren't real as a kid. At no point did I go into cognitive dissonance. I accepted it immediately. And the same was the case with wrestling, but I still loved it. You know, I loved the theatricality. It was entertainment at the end of the day. I accepted it for what it was. And yeah, I was a huge WWF fan from the 80s through the 90s. And the 90s, for me, was the peak of WWF when you had the Attitude Era with Degeneration X, should I say. That was Shawn Michaels. It was formerly part of a tag team called The Rockers. Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty. But then what happened to Marty Jannetty actually? I don't know what happened to him. But with Degeneration X, it was Shawn Michaels, Triple H, Hunter Hearst Helmsley, and Chyna. Was Steph McMahon part of? Yeah, I think Steph McMahon was all, and they are married in real life. in case people didn't realize, they were on-screen couple, but they were also married in real life. Triple H and Stephanie McMahon. The Generation X, Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, obviously. You had Mankind, Mick Foley. What were the other characters that Mick Foley had? One of them was Mankind. What were the other ones? I think one of them was Dude Love, wasn't it? Was there another one? Mankind, Dude Love. Was there another Mick Foley character? Striker says, when I was 7, I was told it wasn't real, and I argued for about 10 minutes until I accepted it. You know, incredibly, I've met adults, 2 girlfriends actually, and when they were adults, they still thought wrestling was real. Can you imagine that? Cactus Jack, thank you. Yes, Cactus Jack. He was another one of Mick Foley's alter egos. So Dude Love, Cactus Jack, and Mankind. For me, I liked the Mankind alter ego the best, with the mandible claw. Some of the special moves in wrestling just did not make sense, and that was one of them. The mandible claw. Because you'd literally just bite the guy's fingers off. Do you know what I mean? Like, how does that even make sense? Yeah, the pedigree. That was Triple H's move. Yeah, the people's elbow. People's elbow, it was kind of a disappointing move, wasn't it? The rock bottom was better. But the best special move of all time, I don't care what no one says, the best special move of all time has got to be the Stone Cold Stunner. And the Stone Cold Stunner also didn't make sense, but the dramatic effect of it was, you know, hilarious. Especially when Vince McMahon got stunned. The way that they would sell it and they'd start like convulsing after being stunned. I think Shawn Michaels might have done one of the best Stone Cold Stunner reactions. Was Shawn Michaels the one who ended up with his like leg up on the rope after being stunned? Because they would all try and outdo each other after getting stunned. You know, who could come up with the most dramatic and ridiculous reaction? Dominica says he stunned Trump before. Did he? Are you sure? Are you sure he stunned Trump? I remember Trump slapping McMahon. Striker says most wrestling finishes were goofy and made no sense. Why was Hogan's leg drop so devastating? Indeed. Like the people's elbow. Like, why was it so devastating? But yeah. Hogan's leg drop even more so. Did I see what Trump posted about Obama? I did, although Trump is claiming he didn't post it and it was somebody else. And to be fair, it was in the context of loads of other politicians also appearing as monkeys. It wasn't just the Obamas. I think even Joe Biden was portrayed as a monkey. So you got to put it in context, innit? Not that I'm a Trump fan. I'm not a fan of any politician. And obviously there's loads of stuff coming out about the Orange Man in the Steen files. So, you know, the political class are trash. Dominica says he never stunned Tyson. No, that's right. He didn't stun Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson was basically a mole, a double agent inside Degeneration X. Because he pretended to be one of them and then he chinned Shawn Michaels. And then he and Stone Cold joined forces and all that kind of stuff. And he drank beer with Stone Cold. So 404 says Shawn Michaels probably had the most realistic finish. What was Shawn Michaels' finish? I forget now. one of the funniest ones and one of the most bizarre things in WWE was there was a Latino wrestler. I forget his name, but he used to put like a sock on his hand, and the sock was like a snake, and then he used to like strike people with his snake sock hand, and somehow, you know, that would knock them out or whatever. And there was some black wrestler who he did that to, and the black wrestler sold it so well that Vince McMahon actually fired him. I was like, why the hell would you fire him? You should be giving him a promotion. And that was the funniest reaction to that special move I've ever seen. It was literally hilarious. If somebody can... Sanitino, is that the guy's name? Says C-Biz. If you look up Sanitino finishing move, that was literally one of the funniest things I've ever seen. That black wrestler, the way he reacted was straight, I mean, classic. The way he oversold it, and McMahon fired him off that. I do not understand the logic. Railway Unboxing fan says Tete is apparently 56. What? I could believe it, but where have you heard that? But if it came out that he was actually 56, I mean, yeah. That seems plausible to me. So yeah, wrestling is comedy gold. Especially the Attitude Era. Even the 80s was funny. Omar says lamb steak or beef steak. In the UK, lamb steak. In Southern Africa, beef steak. What's my opinion on CM Punk's pipe promo in 2011 on WWE? I'm not sure I ever saw it. Furious Boxing says if Tete is 56, he must have been a savage in his day, given that he went 7 rounds with White. Well, you could see it that way, but you could also look at it that White is absolutely shot to high heaven that a 56-year-old was able to take him some rounds. You know what I mean? I do love lamb chops. I do love lamb chops. Especially the way that the Turkish restaurants and takeaways do lamb chops. I love the way they do the lamb chops there. Bit of chili sauce, boss. Garlic sauce. Salad with everything but no onions, boss. Omar says, I feel like lamb has more flavor, and that's why I prefer lamb in the UK. Whereas beef in Southern Africa is very flavorful. The quality of beef, for whatever, I don't know why it is, whether it's what they feed the cows with here, or it's the breed of cows, I don't know what it is, but the beef is way more flavorful in Southern Africa than all the beef I've ever had in Britain. And I was someone that would go and get the most expensive steaks I could find. I'd always get like, if ever I get a steak from the supermarket, I'd always get like the premium one. that cost like £10 per steak or something. You know what I mean? And it's not a very big steak, but there was just something lacking in the flavor. Whereas the steaks here in Southern Africa are much cheaper, much bigger, and much more flavorful. So I don't know what that's all about, but yeah, in Southern Africa, I prefer beef steaks, whereas in the UK, lamb steaks, lamb chops, and stuff like that, because they're flavorful. Would he ever fight on Misfits? I want to say no, but everyone has a price, right? Like Ted DiBiase, speaking of WWF, the $1 Million Man, everybody has their price. And if I was offered some crazy amount of money, maybe they could twist my arm. Maybe they could twist my arm, you know? But it'd have to be a lot. It would have to be life-changing money. Big up D-Man, he says, I find the same with chicken in East Africa. Nowhere in the world comes close, especially Tanzania barbecue chicken. So there's a number of people who I kind of occasionally, I don't want to say follow, but I watch their videos occasionally. One of them is Austin Holloman. Some of you guys may know who he is. He's a Black American guy that has moved to Africa. He's also traveled throughout Latin America, Asia, dating basically, and that's been his main focus, is talking about his dating experiences. But anyway, he's now based in, well, he's been based in Kenya for a number of years, but he's now found a girlfriend from Namibia. So he's in Namibia a lot now. But anyway, long story short, he's traveled to loads of places in Africa, and he's obviously from the United States. I think he's from Dallas, or Houston, one of those cities in Texas. And of all the countries he's been to and all the food he's tried, he said that Tanzania has the best food in the world. Now, that is coming from a guy who has traveled to dozens of countries. Because there's loads of people who haven't traveled outside of their own country, have only been to one or two countries and barely ever try any other cuisine. And they come out and say, my country's cuisine is the best in the world. I mean, give it a rest. Whereas this is a guy who's traveled to dozens of countries all over the world, and he says, Tanzanian food is the best food in the world. I've never tried Tanzanian food, but after he said that, I definitely want to. So big up D-Man for the super chat, much appreciated. And how are things in Tanzania right now? Things calmed down a bit? Is it a little less concerning now? I mean, obviously there's been some terrible stuff that's happened in Tanzania over the past few months with the election and whatnot, but how is it now? Railway Unboxing fan says, for 100k subscribers, would you do a face reveal? No, absolutely not. Show me the money. You know, someone would have to lay some real bread down for me to do that. Real heavy bread. Okay, D-Man says, I have a lot of friends still there. It's all calmed down. However, the president is not popular by the sounds of it. Yeah, she never was from the start. Have I tried conch? Yes, I grew up on conch. Do I like it? Yes. I'm not a fussy eater. And I like seafood in general. Squid, octopus, shellfish. I generally prefer sea fish, you know, saltwater fish to freshwater fish. mussels. They eat those mainly in like Europe, in Britain. Mussels, pickled mussels, and what are the other ones? Cockles. I used to eat those a lot, believe it or not, because I like sour things, like lemony things, bitter things. So I used to buy like jars of those cockles from the supermarket, pickled cockles, and eat those. So yeah, I'm not a fussy eater like that. But long story short, yes, I like conch. Yeah, I did used to appear on camera when I first started my original channel. Almost says I'm a big fan of spice. I hope you mean the spice that you put on your food and not the spice that is smoked. Is it smoked? I don't know anything about that substance, but I've heard about it. So I saw an interview earlier on today or yesterday when, depending on where you are in the world, Chisora was asked whether he thinks that Fury cheated in the Wilder fights. And Chisora said yes. And the guy said, "You care to elaborate?" And he said, "No, I just believe he did." Make it out what you will. Regarding Fury's Wilder's outburst with Simon Jordan, yes, I've spoken about it in this stream, and I've spoken about it in a previous stream as well. King Jam says, "I'm not going to lie, the Super Bowl is boring as F." Truth Channel says, Del Boy is a wind-up merchant. He is. So Zidane says, "You're lucky to get $20K from Misfits. That's as high as they're likely to go." Yeah, that won't get me in a Misfits ring in a million years. Well, as far as I'm concerned, Chisora's clearly got signs of early stage pugilistic dementia. Slurring his speech and walking around on his heels in the ring. He's clearly got early stage pugilistic dementia. Furious Boxing says, "I'd pay the pay-per-view if Hatman was on the card." Well, I still do occasionally post that footage of me hitting the bag, although you can't see my face, but you can see me letting the hands go. That's pretty old footage now. That's like from 2014? Is it 2014? No. Yeah, is it 2014? Yeah, I think 2014 or 2015, that footage of me hitting the bag. Striker says Chisora's going to be talking like Riddick Bowe in 10 years. Or James Toney. Zidane says the rapid jabs, good lead hand, can't lie, and a devastating right hand too, if I don't say so myself. A straight right hand from the gods. Bigging myself up a little bit there. Big up Kylie, he says it was great comedy timing when he handed Wilder the tissues. Yeah, it was. Even Uncle Phil says James Toney sounds so bad it's a shame. Is it a shame? James Toney's not the kind of character I really feel sorry for. I don't wish bad on him. But, you know, even though he's punch drunk, he still talks cocky, doesn't he? So he doesn't look like a sad story. In that sense, he's not like some disheveled old champion who's feeling sorry for himself and looks like he's, you know, some type of invalid. James Toney still trash talks even now. Would I have an MMA match? I prefer not to because I got no idea what I'm doing in MMA. But I guess if they pay the right amount of money, I tap out quick and collect the bag. Striker says Tony hates Usyk. He sounds like an idiot. He also said that he also kind of downplayed Shakur Stevenson over the weekend. He said, you know, Stevenson did all right, but it was boring. If it had been me in there, you would have really seen some stuff. What do I think of Errol Spence's downfall? I think it's a cautionary tale. Errol Spence, as far as I'm concerned, and I could see the danger signs, the warning signs for Errol Spence before he had that crash, because he was turning up to press conferences drunk. He was ballooning up in weight. He was hanging around with Adrian Broner and the Charlos, and I was like, oh no, because Errol Spence, my perception of him anyway, was kind of a good kid. He wasn't raised in a rough environment or anything like that. He was raised by parents who supported his endeavor to be a professional boxer, an athlete. Kind of like Sean Porter, you know, he wasn't a street kid or anything like that. But I reckon he had a bit of a chip on his shoulder because he wasn't a street kid. And that led him to, you know, turn up and hang around a bunch of people like the Charlos and Broner and all these people who were street kids, right? To try and, I don't know, maybe he felt like he had something to prove around those guys. I don't know what it is. But yeah, that was a disaster. And so his discipline went out the window. He started drinking a lot. That led to the terrible car crash. And he did very well to come back from that car crash. He had good wins over Ugas in particular. Good win over him, Danny Garcia. But he just couldn't take any punishment anymore. His body didn't look quite right after that crash. But offensively, he was still formidable. But as far as punishment, he just couldn't take any punishment. Yeah, he got involved with that PBC crew. And it was all downhill from there. Railway and Boxing fan says PTSD. Yeah, maybe. But sometimes when you've suffered that kind of physical shock, trauma, your brain gets rewired, you know, and your body just doesn't react in the same way to being punched. I mean, there were people who talked about how quickly Errol Spence's face swelled up in the Crawford fight, and they said that they think that's a result of the trauma he suffered from the car crash. I think it was actually a doctor, a guy that was a doctor, that was speaking about it in a YouTube video. And it makes perfect sense to me that basically his face swelled up prematurely because of the trauma he suffered in the car crash. So yeah, he threw it all away with getting involved in all that silly stuff, hanging out in the club and making it rain and getting turned up and all that stuff. Like, very unfortunate. He didn't learn until it was too late. And he actually admitted this, because I remember when I was saying long before the crash that Spence is going down a very concerning road, a concerning path. And that these PBC fanboys turned up in the comments of my video and they were like, no, you're hating on him. And you know what, how idiotic they are. And now, after all what's happened, Spence a few months ago came out and said he shouldn't have started drinking and going to the clubs. I mean, yeah, no ish, Sherlock. It's kind of satisfying when the fighter themselves comes out and confirms that the things you were saying are right, when their fans at the time were having a go at you. Even Uncle Phil says Spence should have never been around Yella Beezy. I don't know who that is. I guess he's a rapper. Do I think Spence would have done better against Crawford without the crash? 100%. I think he can't have failed to have done better against Crawford pre-crash. Definitely. Not that he would have won, but he would have done better. He would have given a better account of himself. Omar says, trash talk is great for boxing, but do you think there's a line that people shouldn't cross? I think once people start crossing racial lines and religious lines, that can become dangerous, you know, because there are wider ramifications for society when people start doing that. But as long as you don't cross like racial or religious lines, then whatever in it. Even if I don't like it, I don't think it can be that damaging. I mean, some people say it can be damaging because kids are watching and they're influenced by the stuff the boxers say and do and all that kind of thing. And I hear that argument. But I think in most cases, stay away from the racial stuff and religious stuff. They can say pretty much anything. And it'll probably help rather than hurt the sport anyway, or the fight. Damn, Afro Soul says he got another Dallas rapper called MO3 killed. So that's Yella Beezy. Yeah, I don't know who these rappers are. I don't know Mo3 and I don't know Yellow Beezy. Afro Soul says, I've been living in Dallas since 2021. Yeah, that's a good point, Triple R. Spence should have learned from Brooke, the guy he beat for the title, with all that messing around outside the ring. That's a very good point. So Spence was basically hustling backwards like Tupac, you know? I say that because Tupac was a guy who didn't grow up as a gang member or anything like that. He was a ballet dancer and an artistic type who went to drama school. That was Tupac's background. He didn't come from any kind of gang affiliation background. But once he became famous and hooked up with Death Row, all of a sudden, he wants to start begging it that he's a blood, that he's a gang member, thug life tattoo, and all that type of business. And that led to his untimely demise. With Errol Spence, again, good kid, wasn't a street kid, but had a chip on his shoulder about that. And so once he started hanging around with other fighters who do come from the streets, now he feels inadequate or something. So he wants to show that he's just as reckless and turned up as they are, and dear, oh dear, oh dear, hustling backwards. Yeah, I've seen some clips of Neckbone and all that. Watching Neckbone talk is like watching a character from GTA. All the old school mannerisms and all that kind of stuff. It's like a GTA character in real life. Do I think 40 should be the maximum age limit to stop boxing for health issues? No, I don't. Maybe it's because of my age. Maybe I'm looking back with rose-tinted glasses. But those old school accents and the old school mannerisms were way more iconic than the way people are today. I mean, you look at LA rappers from today compared to the ones from the 90s, and the gang members and all the characters, their accent was a lot heavier, right? The LA, Compton, whatever accent was a lot heavier back then than it is now. Now their accent is kind of like a bit more generic. It's not as strong. Because back then, all them West Coast, LA, Compton, Long Beach guys had a real thick accent. And of course, one of the reasons that Tupac never had their accent is because he ain't from there. Afro Soul says those distinctive accents across America are fading a bit because of social media. All these kids today copy each other. Yeah, that's a fact. Sonya Blade says you can't age limit the heavyweight division when it's held up for decades. I agree. There are still heavyweights who have proven over the decades that they can, do damage in their 40s, at least in their early 40s. And even if they're not fighting younger guys, if they fight each other, they can still be entertaining. I mean, Deontay Wilder against Jelly Zhang, I think Wilder wasn't even 40 by then. Zhang done him in. Have I seen the Bad Bunny halftime show? No. That's a great comment there from Zayden. He says, Tupac was like Donnie Brasco, someone playing the role of a gangster so well, he believed he was one. Yeah. I forget the different types of acting. One is called method acting. Is that the one where you totally immerse yourself in? I don't know. But anyway, some actors fully immerse themselves in character, even off set. And I reckon Tupac did that. He basically he played a character called Bishop in a movie called Juice. And when he signed with Death Row, he literally became Bishop again. It's a character he'd already played in a movie years prior. And so when he signed with Death Row, he literally became Bishop, and he developed that Bishop character to the point where he thought he was Bishop. And look, I'm obviously not from LA, but I know enough about LA gang culture to know that if you're not from that world, you need to stay the hell away from it, right? Because they have rules and regulations and codes and all sorts of stuff in LA gangland that outsiders will not understand, all right? And when you don't understand all the nuances of LA gang life, you can get yourself killed real quick. So, stay away from all that. Do not get involved with all that stuff. I'm going to say that New York street culture is much more accessible for outsiders than LA street culture. You can be an outsider and come into, New York street culture and whatnot, and be able to maneuver and maybe succeed. Whereas in LA, it's all gangland, bro, and the gangs are huge. You know what I mean? And the gang politics are totally different. The way the police interact with those neighborhoods and the gangs is totally different in LA as compared to New York. So you can't come with a New York mentality going into LA. It's a totally different world. People are saying it's the driest Super Bowl ever. Who's in the Super Bowl? I don't even know which teams are playing. Last year was it the Eagles last year that won? In the Super Bowl versus the Chiefs? Or am I tripping over here? Afro Soul says Patriots versus Seahawks this year. Okay. But last year it was the Eagles, right? Yeah, there you go. Afro Soul says, yeah, Eagles beat Mahomes and the Chiefs. Well, the thing about Suge is that, he wasn't targeted in the same way that Tupac was targeted, because Suge was actually from the neighborhood. Suge understood. He didn't necessarily grow up as a gang member, but he was very gang affiliated and close, and he was from the neighborhood. My understanding is that Tupac was targeted because of the fact that he's not from the hood. He's not from the LA hood, right? And so it was seen as a massive insult for a gang member to be beaten up by a guy who's not even a gang member, Tupac. Do you know what I mean? Now, some people believe that P. Diddy was behind the Tupac thing, and that's possible, but the point is, there were ops who were extra angry at Tupac because he'd laid hands on a gang member. And this is a guy who's not from a gang, didn't grow up in LA. Afro Soul says Suge's from an affluent background though. Is he? Didn't Suge Knight grow up in Compton? I'm not sure he's from an affluent background. He may come from like a 2-parent family and all that. And I know he was a football player. Isn't Suge Knight from Compton? Afro Soul says, no, his parents had money according to the guys who knew him. But, you know, how much, I mean, if his parents had real money, they wouldn't have brought him up in the hood. Because even in Brixton, when I was growing up, there were certain people whose families had money, but they only had money relative to everyone else that lived in Brixton. They didn't have real money. If they had real money, they wouldn't be living in Brixton back then. Do you know what I mean? "404 Vibe says he grew up in Compton. Yeah, that's what I thought. He grew up in Compton. So I can't really say that's affluent. You know, he grew up in gangland in Compton. That's why he was so close to all the Bloods, because he grew up around them, went to school with them. Railway and Boxing fan says, I avoid Brixton as much as I can. Brixton's okay now. Brixton's long been gentrified. There are still some rough parts, but the center of Brixton is pretty safe now, so there's nothing really to avoid. "404 Vibe says he played college ball. That's why people think he's affluent. Yeah, I wouldn't describe someone that grew up in Compton as affluent. I mean, he just had more money than most people in the neighborhood, but still lived in a dangerous neighborhood. Let me just confirm, if I can, not that information is necessarily accurate here, but let's have a look at his. Yeah, it says Knight was born in Compton, California, the son of Maxine and Marion Knight Sr. He attended Linwood High School near nearby Linwood, where he was a football and track star. He graduated in '83. He was affiliated with Mob Piru. So, yeah, I can't really say that someone who grew up in Compton grew up in affluence, you know what I mean? At least not at the time period that he grew up in Compton. Because if you go back far enough, Compton originally was a nice middle-class neighborhood. It deteriorated gradually over time, Compton, as far as, you know, crime and everything. But originally, Compton was a nice middle-class neighborhood. And you can tell that from the fact that Compton, and I'm not sure how it is now, but even in the time of the 80s and 90s, Compton didn't have a lot of high-rises. It didn't have a lot of, you know, apartment buildings. It was mostly houses with their own yard and stuff like that. A lot of space and whatnot. It wasn't real high density. And that's very different to like New York. The ghettos in New York were, most of them, you know, apart from Harlem, most of them were built as working class, high density housing neighborhoods from the get-go. From the Bronx, Brownsville, you know, various housing projects throughout Queens, Queensbridge. These places were built from day one to house low-income families, whereas Compton wasn't designed like that. It was more of like a middle-income families. Zayden says, who else heard that story that Michael Jackson punched up Tupac? R.I.P. to both. Yeah, I heard that story, and I literally laughed out loud. I saw the guy who told it. The guy's been telling it for some years, and he retold it quite recently over the past couple years, and yeah, hilarious, bro. Hilarious. Michael Jackson piecing up Tupac. Hilarious. KD versus the World says George W. Bush used to live in Compton as a child. There you go. Compton at one point was a middle class area when it was originally built, but it gradually deteriorated. Anyone remember Back to the Future 2, where Marty McFly goes back in time? Not actually, well, no, he comes back from the future to the present day, which then was 1985 when the movie was based. But he comes back to an alternative reality where his neighborhood is basically a ghetto. Am I going to see the Michael Jackson biopic coming out in April? I need to remind myself what the trailer looks like again before I say yes. Sonia says Compton in Cornwall ain't rough. Well, Kensington in London ain't rough, but Kensington in Philadelphia is extremely rough. Kensington in London is synonymous with affluence and wealth. Kensington in Philadelphia is synonymous with junkies, shootouts, drug dealing. Truth Channel says, don't rant with MJ. You heard his real voice? Yeah, he can switch up, or he could switch up the voice. Kind of like Fleece Johnson. Fleece Johnson talks in that weird, kind of high-pitched voice most of the time. But when he wants to, he can switch it up and talk in an extremely low, deep voice, which is real weird. Danny says, Super Bowl halftime show is the future of the West. Big up, Danny, for the super chat. What do you mean by that, Danny? Please elaborate. What went on in the halftime show? Why are you saying it's the future of the West? Railway Unboxing fan says, Jafar Jackson is playing Michael Jackson. Now I've got to look up this Jafar Jackson. Okay, so this is Jermaine Jackson's son is playing Michael Jackson. Okay. I guess it's a plus that they got a family member to do it. That's a plus. Okay, people are saying it's rainbow activities. Oh dear. Do I think the Stein guy is still alive? Very possibly. It wouldn't at all shock me or surprise me if he's still alive. Danny says Stein is 100% alive, or Steen. And Danny says Steen is 100% alive. Have you seen him, Danny? I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm not saying he's 100%. And how's this for something disturbing, right? Imagine if he is alive and you actually cross paths with him, and you looked at him and he looked at you, and you knew who he is, and he could tell that you recognized him. Wouldn't you fear for your life at that point if you cross paths with Steen when he's supposed to be dead? Maybe you're on holiday somewhere, you go walking in the woods or whatever, somewhere remote, and you cross paths with Steen. You're gonna panic, innit? No one's supposed to see him. You're going to panic. Danny says the circumstances are too convenient for him to be gone. I tend to agree with you, Danny. I'm just playing devil's advocate a little bit. Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I can't say I'm certain, but I think there's a very high probability. What's my opinion on the movie Iron Lung? I ain't seen it. That was one of Method Man's monikers back in the days. One of his nicknames that he gave himself, Iron Lung. He had others. One of my favorite Method Man nicknames was the Tikalian Stallion. Because Tikal was a slang word in New York for green. For, you know, ganja. Slang word back then was Tikal. And obviously Method Man was known for that. And therefore he called himself the Tikalian Stallion. Obviously that's a play on the Rocky Balboa Italian Stallion. The Tikalian Stallion. Also the Iron Lung. See, back in the days, you used to have categories of rappers. And I guess you still have categories of rappers today, but the categories don't seem as distinct. So, for example, in the 90s, you had Afrocentric rappers. And Afrocentric rappers, most of them anyway, had a very distinctive look. They would dress in a particular way. They would have their hair done in a particular way. Their music all sounded kind of similar to each other. The production styles were similar. And it was a very defined, clear subgenre of hip-hop music. Then you had basically stoner rap. Yeah? Stoner rappers. Now, probably the most famous of the stoner rappers was Cypress Hill. But they were kind of a little bit in their own lane, right? Because the audience that they built up was a little different. But yeah, Cypress Hill was stoner rappers. Redman came out as a stoner rapper. Method Man. And there were various other rappers, and their whole shtick their whole image was about being stoners. They'd make songs about being the stoner, you know, they'd have stoner inspired nicknames and all that business. Al Tarif says, brand new gloves feel horrible to punch in. It takes weeks in my experience to get them feeling comfortable. Well, it depends on the brand. One of the reasons that I've always liked Rival gloves is because they feel so comfortable right out the box. The ergonomics are so good. Obviously, Rival have got different models of glove, so I can speak to the ones that I've owned. You got the Rival RSV1 and RSV2. They need a little bit of breaking in, but the Guerreros are pretty much good to go right out the box. The way they've been designed, the different combination of foams, the ergonomics, Rival Guerreros feel great immediately. But many other brands of gloves, particularly Mexican gloves, like most Mexican gloves are pretty horrible out the box. They take a lot of breaking in, most Mexican gloves. And partly it's because they don't concentrate that much on ergonomics, especially with Reyes. Reyes are not an ergonomic glove. But also because the leather that Mexican gloves are made with typically is very, very thick, high quality leather. And leather which is that thick takes longer to break in. They feel very stiff right out the box. Whereas with Rival, they use leather which isn't as thick, so the gloves are a bit more broken in feeling and comfortable for that reason as well, as the ergonomics and the way they're designed and the foams and all that kind of stuff. There are some Rival gloves that I didn't find nice to use out the box. One of them would be God, I'd have to look up the model now, but they're made out of synthetic leather. They have a few different models which are made out of synthetic leather, and synthetic leather usually takes more breaking in than real leather. For those who don't know, there are different types of synthetic leather, but certainly some of the synthetic leather that Rival use on the, let me have a look now, on the RS100 sparring gloves and even the RS11, it's very stiff, that synthetic leather. But the Rival Guerrero sparring gloves, they're all very, very soft and malleable right out the box and instantly comfortable. I would say that Winning are also comfortable right out the box. Not quite as ergonomic as Rival, but yeah, they're comfortable right out the box, Winning gloves. They don't take a whole heap of breaking in. Exactly what Truth Channel said there regarding Afrocentric rappers. De La Soul, Dream Warriors, The Roots, Q-Tip, Brand Nubian, Jungle Brothers, Arrested Development, Tone Loc, Moni Love. Exactly. They all had the same kind of image and similar beats. They would often collaborate with each other. That's right. You mentioned Q-Tip there, but I guess A Tribe Called Quest. That was the group that Q-Tip was part of. Tribe Called Quest had a slightly different image, but overall, those Afrocentric rappers had what would be described as a neo-soul look to them. The way they did their hair and the clothes they would wear, particularly groups like Arrested Development. They had that neo-soul look. They would wear, do you remember them leather Africa pendants with the red, gold, and green? Made out of leather, that all the... yeah. King James says, is Hatman still in shape if a 25-year-old heathen was to attack him? Is he still throwing nasty combos? I'm still trying to keep myself in shape. I'm not in the kind of shape that I'd like to be. I put on quite a bit of weight actually over the past few months since moving to Africa. You know, when you got women cooking for you all the time and stuff like that, the pounds can pile on real quick. So I have put a bit of timber on over the past few months, which I'm now trying to address and get off. Because yeah, just in case. Ashman Boxing says, I feel Spence will be back very soon. He might be. He's apparently been training with Roy Jones. But he was supposed to fight Fundora, right? When was that, a year or so ago? And he pulled out of the fight. I mean, that tells you all you need to know. He pulled out of the fight and it was not rescheduled. So Errol Spence is cooked. Yeah, Erica Badu, Bilal, Common. That's another one, of course. Forgot about him. Talib Kweli and Mos Def, yes. Questlove from The Roots, Q-Tip from The Tribe Called Quest. So I want to say the two biggest groups out of that, they called them, what do they call that collective? The Native Tongues. That's what they called that collective of all those like Afrocentric rappers and groups. The Native Tongues. I want to say the two biggest groups out of there were De La Soul and A Tribe Called Quest. For those who used to listen to their music, who do you guys prefer, De La Soul or Tribe? One of the things about De La Soul, from their very first album up until pretty much the current day, is that I have no idea what De La Soul are actually talking about in most of their lyrics. I have got no idea what them man are talking about. Because they've got all of this like inside slang, which they and their group have made up. And they talk in that like inside Long Island slang. And I've got literally no idea what them men are saying. Whereas with A Tribe Called Quest, their lyrics were a lot more accessible and you could understand it. But with De La Soul, it's like, what are these men talking about? I've got no idea what these guys are talking about most of the time. Even if I go back and listen over and over again, I'm like, what? With that being said, the music still sounded good. You know, yeah, 3 is the magic number and all that. Me, Myself, and I, yep. Probably 2 of my favorite De La Soul tunes right there. Me, Myself, and I, and 3 is the magic. I love the production on that first album. The weird skits and just the whole vibe of it. 3 Feet High and Rising, it was a classic. Love that album, but like, truth be told, I couldn't understand what they were saying most of the time. Kind of like Camp Low, right? Camp Low were this group that emerged in the mid-90s. And their whole gimmick, if you want to call it that, was a 1960s style and aesthetic. So they basically played the role, this was the whole concept of their group. They played the role of 1960s Harlem diamond thieves. Diamond thieves, yeah? They weren't really diamond thieves. It was just like a concept group and they made concept music, and the concept was 1960s diamond thieves, and they used all 1960s slang, and it was very entertaining. But a lot of their lyrics were so esoteric that you could not understand what the hell they were talking about. It's only now, like, their biggest song was called Lucchini. Amazing beat. And the rappers have both got great voices and interesting flows and all that stuff, but for the life of me, I couldn't understand what the hell they were talking about. It's only now, all these decades later, that I've just started to kind of decipher what they were saying on that track. Literally took decades to understand what they're saying. Do I get treated differently in Africa because of my British accent? Yes. But that's the same wherever you go in the developing world. You know, it was the same in Costa Rica. Anywhere you go in the developing world and you're coming from the West and you've got a Western accent, you're going to be treated differently. Yes. And the treatment is different in two ways. People will generally be more polite to you when they hear you got a Western accent, but they're being polite to you often because they want to try and scam you out of money. Or because they want to get close to you and be taken care of you because they think you got money. So generally people will treat you more politely, but there's a lot more attempts to try and screw you over for money. When you deal with the authorities, security, police and stuff like that, you also tend to be treated a little better when they hear a foreign accent as opposed to an African accent. Truth Channel says, in my opinion, I slightly side with A Tribe Called Quest. Yeah, it's close, isn't it? You can understand what Tribe Called Quest is saying in their lyrics. And I want to say, apart from 3 Feet High and Rising, I always preferred Tribe's production. Yeah, 3 Feet High and Rising, I love the production on the album, but De La Soul is Dead, Low End Theory. I know Low End Theory was lauded at the time for being an amazing classic and De La Soul are back, but I never really liked that production style. Minimalist with jazz, bass, and all that kind of stuff. I was never really a fan of that production style. I preferred the direction, the sonic direction that Tribe went in, their production. I agree with Tef Vision. Camp Low Uptown Saturday Night is a classic. It absolutely is a classic. Completely agree. Again, you couldn't understand what they were saying on most of the tracks, but the vibe was impeccable. You know what I mean? The vibe was impeccable. The voices, the flows. Even though you didn't understand what they were saying, you kind of got the gist of the song anyway. But to just give you an example, because I think I've memorized the opening few lines of their biggest track, Lucchini. I always forget which is which. One of them is called Sonny Chiba and the other one's called Geechee Suede. They got these 1960s blaxploitation inspired names. I think the opening lines, the opening bars from Lucchini were introducing Phantom of the Heavens. How did they got introducing Phantom of the Heavens? Something like that with levitate. Actually, I've totally forgotten it. Let me look it up now so I can get the lyrics right so you guys can understand how difficult to comprehend their lyrics were. My memory failing me over here. I thought I had memorized. Yeah, here we go. So, the opening lines of that song are introducing Phantom of the Dark, walk through my heaven with levitation. In fact, some of these lyrics they got on here are wrong. Introducing Phantom of the Dark, walk through my heaven with levitation from... No, that second line, it says from efficient, but that's definitely not what he says. Let me look for a different lyric breakdown, because these guys have got the lyrics wrong. Those are definitely not the right lyrics. Yeah, this is correct. These ones are correct. So it's introducing Phantom of the Dark, walk through my heaven with levitation from reefers, drenching divas in E7, showboating with Rugers, flash vines, Belafonte vigor. Let's skate for what it's worth as we confiscate your figures. So it's extremely slang heavy. Right? Phantom of the Dark, walk through my heaven with levitation from reefers. So they're high off the ganja, drenching divas in E7. What is E7? I don't know. Is that some kind of fragrance? Showboating with Rugers. Rugers, that's a gun. Flash vines. Vines was slang for suits. Belafonte vigor. Let's skate for what it's worth as we confiscate your figures. They're diamond crooks, taking your money. And then Sonny Chiba comes in talking about Casanova Brown, levitating Jiggy and Dashiki's Alahata Car 54. I'm missing a lot of these references they're making. Maybe they're from blaxploitation movies. But anyway, chasing diamond runners headed icebound. Big Chinchilla Diamond Convention, Harlem Box Drop, Freezing World, Heist Hollywood, Madam Butterfly, Let Me In Your House of Pleasure, From the Knuckle Swat, Shadow Boxers Catching Black Eye Blues. I got no idea what that means. From the Knuckle Swat, Shadow Boxers Catching Black Eye Blues. Yeah. It's all Greek to me. Hansa Steel says, isn't Low End Theory Tribe? You're correct. Oh, you're correct, actually. Which was that? Yeah, you're totally correct. I misremembered. Yeah, Low End Theory is not Tribe. Low End Theory is not De La Soul. That was Tribe. Yeah, and I didn't like Low End Theory. I didn't like the production of Low End Theory. So yeah, thank you for correcting me on that, because I got my albums totally mixed up there. De La Soul did not do Low End Theory. That was a Tribe Called Quest. Tribe Called Quest's first album was People's Instinctive Travels in the Path of Rhythm or something. So yeah, but still, I liked the production on most other Tribe albums apart from Low End Theory. I didn't like Low End Theory production. But even with De La Soul, the production on their first album was great, but they got sued to high heaven for sampling loads of different people without getting the samples cleared. And so their subsequent albums, there was far less great samples, and I just didn't like the production from most of the De La Soul albums after that. Whereas with the exception of Low End Theory, and I feel kind of embarrassed now, misremembering that Low End Theory was a Tribe album rather than a De La Soul album. Of course it was. It was a Tribe album. And it had the song on there, Scenario, which is like a posse, what they used to call a posse cut. And that had Busta Rhymes with powerful impact, boom, from the dragon and all that kind of stuff on it. Here we go, yo. Here we go, yo. Say what's the scenario? So Travel with Jordan says, I think Joshua can become champion again. Done it before, he can do it again, especially if he can get the right champion. I think he needs the right kind of momentum. If he can beat Partridge, Luke Partridge, it becomes more possible, I think. Um, oh wow, Hansa Steel says E7 apparently a drink from the 70s made with whiskey and 7-Up. I didn't know that. Vibes Not Found says that was Buster's first song. What no. Scenario wasn't Buster's first song. Buster was part of Leaders of the New School. Or maybe it was his first song that was released, because there was an issue getting that first Leaders of the New School album released, wasn't there? But music did come out from Leaders of the New School. I just don't think the album... Did the album come out? Let me look that up. 1 second. Let's have a look here. So, Leaders of the New School. The album did come out. I don't think it was like a bootleg one, but definitely there was music. Oh, okay. So here it says, hang on. Yeah, so the first tracks he would have appeared on that were released were Leaders of the New School tracks that came out in early 91. But later on that same year in 91, he was on Scenario. That was released later that same year. So it was one of the earliest tracks he was on, yeah. Have I heard Nas and Primo's album? It's getting a bad rap, pun intended. Yeah, I've heard some tracks off there, and to me it sounded trash. The production sounded trash, and it actually reminds me of Low End Theory. It was that type of production, you know, very upright bass, minimalist type sound, which I didn't like at all. And Nas has just been remixing his rhymes for like the past 25 years. He ain't got nothing new to say. So I thought he was trash. Vibes Not Found says only the song with Mobb Deep was good. Have I heard the new J. Cole album? I've never listened to a J. Cole album in my life. I know who he is, and I've seen some of his music videos and heard some of his tracks, but I don't know, his music just doesn't appeal to me somehow. Not a fan of J. Cole. Not a fan of Kendrick. There are one or two Kendrick songs which I think are, you know, kind of cool, but overall, not a fan of Kendrick and not a fan of J. Cole. With Kendrick in particular, his little squeaky voice is a bit annoying. Do you know what I mean? This little squeaky voice that he's got when he's rapping, it's just... Ah, man. He sounds like a gremlin or something, like a chipmunk, or... I don't know how to describe him. I prefer listening to rappers that have a more commanding voice than some little nattering little chipmunk. So how's the Super Bowl going? Who's winning? Guess everyone's watching that now. Either that or they're asleep. Yeah, I was never into that particular era of backpack rappers. The only time I really listened to any backpack rappers was in the very early Raucous days. You know, Raucous Records. In the very early Raucous days, I did listen to some of their artists, and a lot of them were kind of backpackerish. But other than that, I really didn't get into all the backpack rappers. It's not really my thing. Would you call Griselda backpack rap? I would call Killer Mike, that's backpack rap, but Griselda, I wouldn't call that backpack rap. I guess it depends on how you define it. Like Griselda were kind of like a 90s hood rap throwback group. Is that what kids call backpack rap today? Because they put multi-syllables together and all that? You get classed as backpack if you can actually rap well? Or is it just because of the style of beats? I mean, how do they classify it? Because for me, backpack rap was like battle rhymes and, you know, rapping about being a rapper. That's what backpack rap always was for me, is people who primarily rap about how good they are at rapping. And stuff like that. Whereas Griselda are like a street rap group. Yeah, I would say Pharoah Monch was a backpack rapper. Yeah, he was a backpack rapper. Okay, Vibes Not Found says, yeah, if you don't mumble, you're a backpack rapper. Okay, is that how the kids are defining it these days? If you don't mumble, you're a backpack rapper. Damn. Jeru the Damager, he had a great style. Jeru the Damager. Great voice. Very engaging. Very clear delivery. He was an underrated, slept-on rapper, Jeru the Damager. He had a pretty basic style, but because his voice was so powerful and his delivery was so confident, he made it work. And I liked a lot of the production on the first album and the second album. Once he started producing albums without Primo, it got a bit iffy. But his first two albums, the first album was called The Sun Rises in the East. The second album was called Wrath of the Math. I personally prefer the second album. Some people would argue that overall the production on the first album was better. It was more gritty, the production on the first album, but I don't know, I like the production of the second album a bit better. There were some beats which were like, but overall, I prefer the second album production. Yeah, the first album you had My Mind Spray, Ain't the Devil Happy, Come Clean. But I feel like on the second album, he was even more charismatic and even more funny on the second album. On the second album was when he started going at P. Diddy, by the way. He was sending shots for Puffy and Jay-Z on the second album. Vibes Not Found says, do you listen to Afro beats or do you think it steals too much from dancehall? I don't think it steals anything. Well, actually, let me rewind. For a second, I thought you were talking about Amapiano. You're saying Afro beats. Well, I don't think Afro beats steals that much from dancehall. Some Afro beat songs are clearly very dancehall inspired, but others are very different to dancehall. And at the end of the day, if something sounds good, it sounds good. It doesn't matter what it's inspired by. But of the kind of African club music, I like Amapiano the best. It's a very unique sound. They use a lot of log drum and other instruments, and it's a different tempo to most other Afro beats. So yeah, I like Amapiano. Very, very distinctive sound. I like the way they use the log drum. Very creatively. And dancehall, by the way, these days is trash. Dancehall is so trash these days that even the old school dancehall artists are talking about how trash it is. So I don't know what happened to dancehall, but these days it's just trash. It sounds like generic trap music or something. It's just so weird. The old classic dancehall style is gone. I don't know why they've abandoned it. Truth Channel says Diddy wasn't running ish. No, he said ruining. Hands of Steel said J. Rue called out Diddy for ruining hip hop. And yeah, he did. What track was that when he started going at Jay-Z and going at P. Diddy? Let me look up the track listing. I'll be able to tell you just in the track listing without listening to the track, because I know the tracks well. And they were great album names too. The Sunrises in the East was a good name. The Wrath of the Math, that's a great name for an album. Wrath of the Math. Track listing, let's have a look here. One Day, that's the track where he was dissing Diddy and Jay. It was on a track called One Day. The track listing for Wrath of the Math was the intro, Wrath of the Math, The Frustrated Ninja, Black Cowboys, The BS, Whatever, Physical Stamina, One Day, Revenge of the Prophet Part 5, Scientifical Madness, Not the Average, Me or the Papes. The two best tracks off the album were actually the two singles. Me or the Papes was one of them, and You're Playing Yourself, which is an absolute classic. Even the video's a classic. So go look up J. Rue the Damager. It's spelled J-E-R-U. That's how it's spelled that way, but pronounced J. Rue. The Damager. Damager being spelled D-A-M-A-J-A. J. Rue the Damager, You're Playing Yourself. Classic track, which I think holds up even now. Classic video. Yeah, I go to many brunches and stuff like that, and they always play Amapiano. Now, I've never really got into the Amapiano made by Nigerians. Yeah, I prefer the South African Amapiano. All right, peeps, gonna shut this one down. Shout out to everyone for joining the chat we had here. Special shout out to those who donated via Super Chat. They were Striker, D-Man, and Danny. Until next time, take care, be good. Have a great week. I'll catch you on the other side. I'm out.